You know, what does it mean when a politician says that we have a budget surplus? We've heard a lot about that during the discussions for a tax cut. And underneath the current tax debate in Washington is the question of the budget surplus and even the national debt. We're going to try to make some sense out of what all this means, and are these real numbers that we can sink our teeth into? Tax attorney and a professor at the University of Delaware, Sheldon Pollack, joins us tonight to talk about this. Help me to understand surplus. I think that when I hear surplus, I think, well, it means I got some extra money in my checking account and I can go do something with it.
Well, that really is what a surplus is. In the context of the government, it means at the end of the fiscal year, which ends this year at September 30th, you actually have more money in your pocket. You took in more money than you spent. And the estimates are, going back to July, the Congressional Budget Office announced a prediction that we'd have about $120 billion surplus for this current fiscal year that's about to end. Last year we had a small surplus, and it was the first year in 30 years that the government actually produced a surplus. That's an important number, although it's going to turn out to be a little less than 120 for this year. That's actual money that we've saved, that we've put aside. The problem is the politicians have really been reacting at a different number. The other number that the Congressional Budget Office issued is a 10-year budget projection, and that projection is for $2.9 trillion surplus over 10 years. That's a lot of money, but there's one key operative difference word. The different word is projected. That's not money that we have yet. That's a projection of what we would take in over 10 years. And it assumes certain things. One thing it assumes is that the economy is going to be roughly about the same level of production as it is now. Mostly we're taking in a lot of money on the income tax because the economy is doing so well. Whether it does that well for 10 years or not is a big difference. The other assumption in that projection is that the government spending is going to stay within legal limits right now. And that's very difficult. We're seeing right now Congress is having difficulty staying within what's called the budget caps that were agreed to in 1997. Spending is increasing now. That's why we're really not going to have $120 billion for this year's surplus. It's going to be a little bit less. So the politicians have reacted on the basis of a $2.9 trillion projected surplus and started to create new kinds of clever ways to spend that money. We've seen both parties doing that.
And it's interesting because isn't the whole point of forecasting that far out so that we can plan wisely instead of running out and using what we may or may not have?
Sure, and to operate correctly now you want to know where you're going, but very few people would suggest we rely too carefully or too much on projected surpluses. The 10-year surpluses are really not worth an awful lot. It's hard to even get a one-month surplus and be accurate. The problem is the politicians have already enacted ways to spend that money, adopted ways to spend that money that become fixed in law. And therefore, if that budget surplus doesn't turn up, the money's not there, and yet the tax cuts are adopted, or the new spending programs that the president has urged would be adopted in law. The Republicans came up with a bill this summer for an almost $800 billion tax cut. That's over 10 years. The president's supposed to veto that either this week or over the weekend. But the president enacted a plan himself, or proposed a plan of spending increases. That's another way to use up that budget surplus.
Fascinating. I can almost hear the conversations at the end of your classes with your students at the university, and I appreciate this chance for you to speak with us. And I am remarking that you didn't even say the word debt. So
well, yeah, I mean, that's the other side of the equation, is
that's right.
$5.6 trillion
I couldn't
debt.
ignore my debt. I bet you couldn't either. Somehow it gets ignored sometimes. But thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Really interesting. We hope you'll come back and join us.
Thank you.
We'll take a look at what happened today on Wall Street, and then you better get out the woolies. Where do you see tonight's low temperature in our forecast?